go. All right, I call to order this Board of Assessment meeting for Thursday, January 9th, 2020. Tracy, could you do those present?
Ms. Torres?
Here.
Mr. Sanctus?
Here.
Mr. Herrick?
Here.
Mr. Parkinson?
Here.
All right, we will, if everybody would stand, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So we do need to move past the minutes without Matt. We don't have a true quorum for those minutes, as I was not present for that, so I don't want to jump in and approve those. So we will move on to the appeal. And guess what? You guys are going first because you're the only ones here. So you'll be up, and my understanding is there's a short letter from the people, and we'll read that after, and then we'll ask you questions after on both things.
Sure. You're supposed to swear in any of the parties who might give testimony.
Anybody's going to give testimony? Anyone? You're going to give testimony?
Yes.
All right. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right. Is that a fair enough swearing in?
Yes.
Ours isn't different, is it?
No, it's excellent.
Okay.
Some people don't like to swear, they like to affirm.
Okay. Or affirm. All right. So I think we're good. Are we good?
Yeah, so according to our regs, the assessor makes a presentation.
Perfect.
All ears.
All right, thank you, Chair Herrick and members of the board. We appreciate your time this evening. I'm Evan Albert. I'm from the law firm Bernstein Schur, and I'm representing the assessor, Nick Cloutier, who you know. This is Joel Moser, also from Bernstein Schur, with us this evening as well. I'm prepared to make a brief opening statement and summary of the assessment, if that's acceptable, and then we'd proceed to testimony.
Sure.
Okay, so as you probably know, this is an assessment, an abatement regarding an assessment of Piper Shores, which is a high-end life care retirement community here in Scarborough. It's on approximately 140 acres of oceanfront property, including a number of buildings as depicted on this map here, which was also included in the materials in your binder at Exhibit 12. Just to give you some background on the property, there's 200 independent living units in both apartments as well as cottages. The cottages are the buildings that you can see there depicted. There's 12 of them of 2, 3, and 4 unit buildings. The independent living apartments are in the main building, which is labeled as Jocelyn Kirkwood on the map. And then there's the Holbrook building, which contains 50 assisted living and 40 skilled nursing units. There's also related common areas and amenities, including an indoor pool and hot tub, fitness center, hair salon and spa, dining facilities, covered parking, and others. Now, this assessment was the result of a thorough and reasoned process as part of the town-wide commercial industrial revaluation that, as you know, occurred in 2018, followed the next year by the residential revaluation. The assessor considered all available information, including responses to requests for information that the assessor served on Piper Shores, received information back. Some of that we'll look at this evening. The assessor considered all three approaches to value and relied most heavily on the cost approach, which we'll discuss. Now, the initial assessment, as you know, was performed by KRT, and as part of it, they measured the main building, the size of the main building and the Holbrook building. After the assessment was issued and the taxpayer made its abatement request, those two buildings were remeasured, and on the basis of that remeasurement, it was determined that, in fact, the size of those buildings should be reduced, which reduced the assessment. And Mr. Cloutier will talk in more detail about that. In connection with that relook at the property while doing the assessment, there were some other changes made as well. An adjustment was made to the depreciation that was applied. There was a change to the base lot area. The depreciation increased the value, so it offset somewhat, though not entirely, the change from the remeasurement. In addition, the base lot was recalculated to better reflect the actual development of the buildings on the property. And then there were two other changes that were made. The pool and the hot tub had not previously been included, so those were included. That made a small additional contribution to value. And then finally, there were two buildings, the Cape House and the maintenance garage, which are shown here. They're actually on Lot 2, which is a separate lot owned by Piper Shores. They had been included on Lot 5 by KRT, so the assessor put them back onto Lot 2 as they should be, which again reduced the value of Lot 5. So as a result of all those changes, the overall assessed value went from $84,297,100 to $81,371,000, which was an abatement of $3,556,100 from the original 2018 assessment. We believe that reflects just value, and the taxpayer in this case has not submitted any evidence to support any other value on which the board, we think, could conclude that there's some other just value that it should apply here. And really there are two issues that we think are in play tonight that we'll focus on most heavily. One is the depreciation, which we'll talk about, and then the other one is this claim of unjust discrimination. Now the board has recently already considered that claim and we think resolved that claim, and that was in the abatement request of Oak Hill Holdings, LLC. We have copies of that decision if it would be useful for any reason. I know that you just recently issued it, you have it. We see no reason to deviate from that decision in this case. It's the same exact issue. Nothing has been presented that would give the board any reason to come to a different conclusion. So unless there's any questions that the board wants to ask, we're not going to cover that issue, but I just wanted to mention it because it is something that the taxpayer has raised. We think it's been sufficiently covered. There was the letter that I believe that is going to be read later from Piper Shores. I would just note that that was submitted after the deadline for submitting materials. We're not going to ask that it be stricken from the record, but we think that's at least something the board could consider in assigning how much weight it's going to give to that letter. Piper Shores has chosen not to appear or present evidence here, and it is the taxpayer's burden to not only show why this assessment does not represent just value, but also what the proper fair market value is here. We don't think they've done that, and therefore they haven't met their burden in this case. And again, as Mr. Cloutier will speak to, we think the current assessment is fully reflective of just value. So with that, I will begin the testimony of Mr. Cloutier, unless there's any initial questions or anything else before we begin.
Thank you. A piece of that.
Oh, yeah.
Ruined my phone, forgot my paper.
You like working in that color scheme?
Yes. It's interesting.
That's how I can find what I'm looking for on my desk. I have different colored ones now.
Sorry, go ahead, guys.
Okay, great,
Sorry.
thank you. So, Mr. Cloutier, first of all, could you tell the board, who I think you know, how long you've been the assessor of Scarborough?
I started as an employee in mid-December, but I officially became the assessor for Scarborough on December 30th of 2019.
And could you give the board a brief summary of your assessing experience?
Before coming to Scarborough, I was the assessor for the town of Brunswick, and before that, I was the deputy assessor for the town of Wells, and I also have done contracted work for the towns of North Yarmouth and Freeport in assessing.
And so to be clear, you were not the assessor when this assessment was performed, correct?
That's correct.
Dave Bouffard was the assessor.
That's correct.
Do you have an understanding of Mr. Bouffard's assessing experience?
Yes. Without the specific dates, he has quite a bit of years of experience. In addition to his 2 years here as the assessor recently preceding me, he worked for the State of Maine Revenue Services as an auditor of multiple municipalities in southern Maine, so auditing other assessors. And before that, he was also in the assessing department in Scarborough in a different capacity. And he also did independent appraisal work for that.
And notwithstanding that you were not the assessor when this assessment was performed, do you have an understanding of the process that was followed in reaching this assessment?
I do. So I reviewed his work, and I feel it was all done accurately and fairly, and my own lens as an assessor can testify to the methodology as well.
And based on your experience and judgment, do you believe that the revised assessment is reflective of just value?
I do.
Now, I'd like to cover a little bit of background on Piper Shores, even though we've already covered it just to get it into the record. So could you describe briefly what is Piper Shores to the best of your understanding?
Yes. It's a high-end retirement facility community combination of assisted living and nursing care and independent living facilities.
Do Do you have an understanding of the number of units, individual residences that Piper Shores consists
I
of?
do. There's 200 independent living. 160 of those are apartments, 40 are cottages, and then there's 50 assisted living units and 40 nursing care units.
When was Piper Shores first constructed?
The main building was constructed at the very tail end of 2001 and was brought into service in 2002, and all the cottages were built in 2002.
And has Piper Shores been expanded over time?
Yes, most notably there was a workshop built in 2004, and even more notably in 2017, the Wayland addition to the Holbrook portion of the building was constructed in 2017, as was an art studio center.
Can you just identify the Wayland addition on the map,
Yes,
just to
it's
orient?
the end of the Holbrook building, significant portion, but not all of Holbrook, was the 2017 addition in question.
And does that contain resident units? What does that consist of?
Yes, so the Wayland and Holbrook as a whole consist of 50 assisted living and 40 nursing care units.
All right, and turning to the property more broadly, where is the property situated?
It's situated off the Spurwink Road, which is here, so that to the southwest of that, it's an oceanfront property with approximately 800 to 850 feet of ocean frontage, and it's on tax map R101.
How big is the property?
It's approximately 141 acres.
And could you just briefly describe what the buildings are, the improvements on the property?
Yes, as has already been discussed to an extent, the main building, which I've referenced, is Jocelyn and Kirkwood, and then the Holbrook, and then the very end of the Holbrook here is the Wayland, so that was the 2017 edition, whereas the main was the 2002. And the cottages here were 2002, and those each consist of multiple residential units as well. And there's also a workshop and art building facility.
All right, let's turn now to the 2018 assessment. Could you please describe generally how the property was assessed for the April 1st, 2018 assessment date?
In 2018, for the assessment as of April 1st, 2018, KRT appraisal was contracted by Scarborough, which is part of the commercial industrial revaluation, and they measured and listed this property in detail.
Okay. After that, what happened?
The town received an application for abatement on March 8th of 2019, and the assessor responded with requests for information and also reviewing the property information, including some steps that he took, which I can get into.
Sure. And prior to getting to the revised assessment, what was the original assessment that KRT came back with?
The original assessment, and that's, if you care to follow along, that's Exhibit 9, and that was $84,927,100 for all of the property.
Now, could you describe the steps that were taken once you received the abatement in response to it?
Yes, Mr. Bouffard issued a 706A request in which he was asking for information that might help further information like an appraisal, financial statement, annual report, and furthermore, he took their concerns into consideration by remeasuring the building with KRT, in which they made sure they did separate parts of the building with lasers specifically positioned to get the most accurate measurement possible. And like we will go into more detail, the measurement did change on the facilities. The square footage dropped, and I can explain that. In addition to that, because the request for review is all-encompassing and thorough, an assessor doesn't just do one thing. He also, Mr. Bouffard also reviewed the depreciation methodology and made a change to make it more accurate. There was also a review of the methodology to calculate the base lot for the land value, in which he used GIS, and I can get to that later. And then two other things that he, when reviewing the property, determined were incorrect, and he reviewed and fixed. he added a pool and hot tub that were in the property that previously had not been picked up by KRT. Those two items added an additional $22,300 in value. And he also removed the old Cape House and maintenance garage, which is actually on this lot, Lot 2, these two buildings, and has incorrectly been included in the large Lot 5 of Piper Shores. He removed those and put them back on Lot 2 where they actually reside, and that reduced the assessment $296,900.
Now, you mentioned serving requests for additional information on Piper Shores. Did the taxpayer respond to those requests?
Yes, they did. They provided multiple documents, some of which are exhibits in this provided for you.
And were those documents considered as part of this process of reassessing the assessment?
They were considered.
Was there other documents or information that were considered as part of that process?
Like I alluded to, the thorough revaluation of the property by going out and remeasuring and making sure everything was correct, including looking at Marshall and Swift data that comes into the camera system. We use Vision to make sure the appropriate depreciation was being applied, and like I'd also said, the base lot was taken into consideration, and a different methodology was used to arrive at a different base lot than originally had been given by KRT.
And before we get to the specifics on the remeasurement and the others, what approaches to value were considered by KRT as part of the assessment?
All three approaches to value, so the cost, sales, comparison, and income approach.
And in assessing a property like this one, is there one approach that carries more weight than the others?
With this property, the cost approach is what carried the most weight, especially because the sales comparison approach wasn't very usable. It's a very unique property and there aren't comparables to speak of.
What then, if the cost approaches carried more weight, what is the role of the other two, the income approach and the sales comp approach, in terms of determining your conclusion of value?
They are used and taken into consideration to support the value that was derived with the cost approach. And in this case, the other approaches did validate the cost approach final value.
Now, so you mentioned that the property was remeasured as part of considering the taxpayer abatement application. Mm-hmm. Could you now speak specifically as to how that process occurred?
Sure. So like I alluded to, the KRT uses a series of lasers that are set up on the exterior of the building that reads into a computer program that accurately measures all the distances of each of the ins and outs of the facilities of the main buildings. The Jocelyn, Kirkwood, and Holbrook, most particularly, were the ones in question. And Mr. Buffard attended that session of the remeasuring, and the exterior measurements of the main buildings went from a total of 433,848 down to a total combined of 391,844 square feet. So there was a reduction of 42,004 square feet with the remeasurement with this laser methodology at the second review.
And is it your understanding that Piper Shore now agrees with that corrected measurement?
It is my understanding, specifically in a couple of the documents that were submitted, Exhibit 14, there's a quotation, but it approximately says that the assessor, after 10 months, corrected the building measurement, and that's Exhibit 14, one of the last pages, so they agree with it. And furthermore, another exhibit that they provided, which is Exhibit 7, which is an insurance policy response based on the 706A request. They add up the two main buildings, so the Jocelyn, Kirkwood, and Holbrook combined as 400,000 square feet, which is actually more than we came up with. So they do agree based on those two pieces of information.
And you referenced Exhibit 14, so if you can just look at that. Are you referring to the statement that's on the second to last page of that exhibit, paragraph 1? The third full sentence begins, while the assessor has finally corrected the size of and allocated specific values to the main building and the Holbrook building.
That is the sentence that I'm referring to. Thank you.
All right, now you mentioned that as part of this, the depreciation methodology was changed as well. Could you explain both what KRT used in terms of a depreciation method and rate, and then how and why it was changed?
Sure. So the original assessment for April 1st, 2018 from KRT, the depreciation percentage was 24%, but that was using effective year built of 1994 when Mr. Bouffard reviewed all details of the property, and it was determined based on our camera system vision, which utilizes Marshall and Swift data, which in turn utilizes market data. It was found out that this type of facility at this good quality should actually be an effective year built of 2006. So just to give a little frame of reference, the original assessment by KRT of 1994, that would make the effective year 8 years older than the actual. But in this building, that was determined not to be appropriate because it's very well maintained and it was very high quality to begin with. So the combination of a good plus 20 grade building that is meticulously maintained, our camera system corrected that to come up with a 13% depreciation and an effective year built of 2006. So the depreciation changed from 24% to 13%.
So let's just break that down and walk through that a little bit, if that's okay, because that was quite a mouthful. If you could look at Exhibit 9, which I think you're on, and these you mentioned were the original property cards for the assessment, correct?
Correct.
And I believe it's the second page where it shows the depreciation under cost market valuation.
So if you flip to the back side of the first page, under cost market valuation, it would show the things I was just referring to. I'll give you a moment to get there in Exhibit 9. So like I was saying, the Exhibit 9, if you flip to the back side of the first page, cost market valuation right in the middle of the document, this is the original assessment from KRT. AYB, actual year built, 2002. Effective year built, right below that, 1994. And then slightly lower down, depreciation, 24%.
And that 24% is calculated off of the effective year built, is that correct?
Correct.
And does it also take into account the condition of the property?
It does.
And where on here does it tell us how the condition is being assessed?
So in this instance, the condition, if you will, the depreciation code is average, which it still is on the new card, but to my knowledge, KRT was using a different methodology that takes into account a building that isn't as well maintained or good quality. There's tables in Marshall and Swift, and they were using an average maintained average building, not the proper good plus 20 well-maintained building, and that doesn't show on the card.
So in your opinion, was it appropriate to use an effective year built of 1994 for a building like this that, as you have said, it was very well maintained and constructed in 2002?
No, I feel 1994 is an inappropriate effective year built for this type of a property for those reasons.
And then if we could turn to Exhibit 11, and tell us what Exhibit 11 is.
So Exhibit 11 are the updated property cards after Mr. Bouffard's review, thorough review. So Exhibit 11, the first page, flip to the back side. The same part of the page, middle, cost market valuation. So although the actual year built is still 2002, the effective year built in our CAMA system is 2006. It's not on this card because it was what the CAMA system comes up with. The 1994 was there because it had to be overridden to be put in as such, but in my system it says 2006 there. And if you scroll further down on this, look further down rather, depreciation percentage is 13% now with the new methodology I mentioned.
And to be clear, you mentioned the 2006 effective year built that the CAMA system automatically assigns. Is that something that you're able to change? using this depreciation methodology?
You would have to override it to change it from 2006. So that means using our standard method, which we use for almost all properties unless there's a reason not to, the CAMA system, given all these qualities of construction, automatically chose 2006, and that's what we agree with.
So to put it another way, you didn't choose 2006, the CAMA system chose that because that's what it assigns as the standard
Correct.
depreciation.
Yep.
And again, the depreciation code, what does that mean here, depreciation code A?
A stands for average. There are various degrees that you can place in there manually: poor, fair, average, good, very good. And we chose average to be conservative in favor of the taxpayer.
Is there another condition that you could have reasonably assigned given the condition of this property?
It could have reasonably been given a good condition factor, depreciation code rather, but we determined that because the grade of construction is already good plus 20, and that it's average for a great quality building, or between average and good, we would favor with the conservative average in the taxpayer's favor.
And the depreciation percent that's listed as 13, is that a number that you chose, or was that assigned by the system based on the depreciation calculations that it does?
That's assigned by the system based on the tables in the system.
Okay. And again, what are those tables based off of?
Marshall and Swift cost data for commercial buildings of this nature, and then those are derived from market data.
Okay. And just to go back to what KRD, well, we can leave it at that. I think we've covered it. You mentioned the Wayland edition of the Holbrook building, which was completed in 2017. Mm-hmm. Now, was that factored into the depreciation analysis?
So that could have been considered as 2017, but it's intertwined with the Holbrook building as it sits. The addition is on the end of it. So in favor of the taxpayer again, rather than try to separate out the part that was built in 2017, which is possible but difficult, and the 2002 was used, as was for the rest of the building, in favor of the taxpayer because it's all one building, even though a vast majority of that Holbrook, the Wayland addition, was constructed in 2017.
And perhaps it's self-evident, but if you had considered the Wayland addition separately as having been built in 2017, what would that have done to the overall level of depreciation applied to this property?
That portion of the building attributed with 2017 actual year built would have had a much different depreciation, perhaps only 2% depreciation, and I ran the numbers in the CAMA system just as an example, and it would have increased the assessment over $2 million, if not more.
But in this case, because of the difficulties of separating out the Wayland addition and the rest of the Holbrook building, was it reasonable to consider those as one with the 2002 year actual year built?
It was reasonable.
Now, you mentioned changes to the base lot size. Mm-hmm. Let's move away from depreciation now and talk about
Sure.
base lot. So first of all, how was the base lot originally determined when KRT did the mass assessment?
So the KRT original assessment of the base lot, they take the gross building area, so all of the buildings on this property, there's 16, if you look at it that way with all the cottages and whatnot, and the gross building area at their initial measurements came to 517,958. And they took that square footage and used a guideline of 3-to-1 ratio to determine the base lot. But I would reiterate that it was a guideline and not a hard and fast rule. And when they did that, they came up with an original assessment base lot of 35.67 acres.
And if you could look at Exhibit 8 in the binder for just a minute. First of all, do you know what Exhibit 8 is?
Sure. So it's a KRT manual excerpt from their commercial and industrial land valuation, so the revaluation manual.
And this is what they utilized in conducting the revaluation?
That's correct.
And if you look at the page 37, it's on the lower right-hand side, their page numbers. Mm-hmm. Section it says land to building ratios.
Mhm.
And if we follow that over to the next page, under commercial, it shows that for buildings greater than 51,000 square feet, it says 3-to-1 ratio.
That's the 3-to-1 ratio I was mentioning. And then if you go back to page 37, the previous page, down where it's bold, land to building ratios, the bottom third of the page, it is noted, the following land to building ratios have been used as a general guideline in determining the prime site.
And given that that's a guideline, is it appropriate to deviate from it in appropriate circumstances?
It is, and in this circumstance, upon re-review by Mr. Bouffard, he determined that it was a good fit to not use just a guideline ratio, because this is a unique property with all the spread out buildings. This guideline is perhaps more appropriate when it's just one large building to determine the base lot, but these buildings are very spread out and uniquely shaped.
Describe then what the process was for determining the base lot in the revised assessment.
In the revised assessment, Mr. Bouffard coordinated with the GIS coordinator of the town of Scarborough, and if you can remind me which exhibit, it's Exhibit 12. I would encourage you to go to Exhibit 12. That's the first page is just this blown up image that we see of the parcel and the building outlines. But if you go to the next pages, it shows the methodology. So Mr. Bouffard and the GIS coordinator used not only GIS but Google Earth to do an overlay and specifically map out the disturbed areas of the parcel. So namely the areas of the parcel that have improvements on them. So buildings, roads, parking. And that was what was used to determine the new base lot, which actually reduced in size from the original. So it went from 35.67 acres down to 31 acres.
And is it fair to say in this case that the reconfigured base lot reflects the actual manner in which the property is developed as opposed to just the 3-to-1 guideline that KRT had originally used?
Yes, definitely.
In your opinion, in this case, which is the more appropriate methodology to use?
I think the more appropriate methodology is the latter because it takes into account the unique circumstances of this property.
The latter being the base lot determined based on the GIS.
Correct. And the resulting 31-acre base lot.
If you could turn to Exhibit 7 for just a moment. Moving away from base lot now. First of all, could you just identify what Exhibit 7 was?
Yes, Exhibit 7 is one of the responses from the 706A request from the taxpayer, and it was property and casualty insurance.
And this is a insurance policy for a casualty and property policy for Piper Shores?
Correct.
All right. And is this a document that the assessor relied on in coming up with the revised assessed value?
To my understanding, it was received after the new assessed value was finalized. However, it supports the value that was derived.
So this is not the basis on which the assessor came up with the value, but it impacted whether or not the assessor believed that the value was correct. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And what about this document is important in your opinion?
The very last 2 pages. So if you go to almost, pretty much tab H, but then the last 2 pages of section 7, those are where the total amounts of statements of value come into play. And if you go to the very last page, in fact, so it's the total values, blanket building and business personal property limits. You start to see that the values are quite high. Let's see, just the building values, that column is $101,123,820.
Right, so just to back up, this document lists each building on the property individually, correct?
That's correct.
Then it assigns a building value to each one, is that correct?
Yes.
And if we come down to the bottom of that column, the total value listed is $101 million, correct?
That's correct.
And is it your understanding that this schedule of values is what then the insurance policy is based on in terms of the amount of coverage that is provided?
That is my understanding, yes.
All right. And in your view, does this corroborate the assessed value that the assessor has determined?
Yes, it does.
Just to orient everyone to the other documents in the record, we've covered some of them, but let's just go through them just so we're all on the same page. Exhibit 1, that is the abatement request, is that correct?
Yes.
Exhibit 2 was the assessor's response to the abatement request, is that correct?
Correct.
Exhibit 3 were the 706A requests for additional information that you mentioned.
Yes.
Exhibit 4 was just a request for an additional time that the taxpayer submitted. Exhibit 5 was Piper Shore's response to those requests for information.
Yes.
Exhibit 6 is not in the binders, but that was a document that was submitted to the assessor confidentially, is that correct?
That is correct.
And without identifying that document or revealing any information contained within it, the board can look at it if it determines it's appropriate. Do you believe that document to be corroborative of the assessed value in this case?
Yes, I do.
Exhibit 7 we've just looked at was the insurance policy.
Yes.
Exhibit 8 was the excerpt from the KRT evaluation manual.
That's correct.
9 were the original property tax cards with
Yes.
the unabated value, is that correct?
Yes.
10 was, well, why don't you say what 10, Exhibit 10 is?
All right. 10 is the income valuation card provided by KRT as of the 4/1/18 valuation date.
Okay. 11 we've looked at, those were the revised property tax cards, correct?
Yes,
12 were the maps, right?
that's correct.
13 were the, well, what is 13?
Maine Life Care audited financial statements that were provided in response to the 706A request.
And just briefly, are those something that you relied on? Why are those presented in this binder?
They were part of the 706A request response from the taxpayer, so we provide them for full transparency, and they were taken into consideration.
And finally, Exhibit 14, that was the taxpayer's appeal to the Board of Assessment, is that correct?
That's correct.
To the extent we need a formal motion to put these documents in the record, we can make them if they're there by virtue of our submission. All right. So I think we've covered all aspects of, or at least the primary aspects of this revaluation process. So could you just summarize why you believe this valuation reflects just value?
I believe that upon responses for an abatement request and review, the assessor thoroughly reviewed all the information available, including remeasuring the properties and reviewing if the base lot was calculated in an appropriate manner, reviewing if the depreciation was calculated in an appropriate manner, making sure that buildings such as the old Cape building and the maintenance building were removed appropriately, and any missed items were picked up appropriately. So that's just to say that the assessment and reassessment was very thorough, and we took everything provided to the town under consideration, and all three approaches to value were considered.
So at this point, that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to take questions as the board sees fit.
I think I'd like to read that letter before we ask questions. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
If you guys don't mind.
No,
I think the chairman was just going to sort of sit up here in silence and read?
Yeah, right? I
the,
mean,
Judson
I think so, the
Harris
three of
submission,
us,
and then
right?
that might
Just
inform some
read through it,
questions.
yeah.
Sure,
Might bring up some questions, might answer some questions we have.
sure.
Where is it?
It's not in our binder, just so you know, unless it was added separately.
Um,
In the front,
Oh, this?
it should be the one,
This.
this one, I believe.
It's a December 6th letter.
Marjorie, do you want this one?
I forgot my binder.
Do you want this one?
Yeah, let's give it Marjorie.
Thank you.
Alright, so what is this? This is junk. Is it one of these two? Thank you.
Excuse me.
Oh, yeah, December 6th. Sorry.
Is this right?
Have you read this? Have you guys read this?
We have, yeah,
Okay.
we did receive it, and we read it, yeah.
Do you want to read it out loud for the public recording? Chris,
I'm sorry?
do you want to read it out loud for the public recording?
Yeah, I think it should go on the record by reading it out loud.
It is in the record,
It
but do you
is.
think it would be?
Yeah.
But this is taped, right? So
Yeah.
Right,
I didn't think for the taping that it might be better to have it read out loud.
yeah. I agree.
I'll read it if you want me to.
Yeah, the only thing I would note is that we also submitted a letter too, and I'm not suggesting we read them both, but our letter wouldn't be in the record on the tape, so in fairness, you know, that may be a reason not to, but
Okay.
whatever you think is best.
I mean,
All right.
no
whatever.
offense to anybody else, I'm kind of thinking that if somebody really wanted to read it, they can,
Right.
no offense to them, they do have the ability to come. I mean,
Yeah,
we're not
that's a
reading
good
every
point.
one of these documents
Yeah.
too, right?
Okay. I
If
started
they wanna
thinking
see
about
it,
that as
it is
well, yeah.
public knowledge, they can come see it.
All right, Chris.
Well, and
that's-
if
yeah,
the-
I see your
Is that
point.
fair?
Yeah, that's fine.
And we may have an extra binder if it would be helpful. We'd have to-
I read the whole thing.
Okay,
I
great.
mean, I've gone through it. I
Yeah.
even read the other one that was here in the office. So
Great, okay.
It's just, I'm sick, I forgot it.
so you can see that there's three things going on here. One is that there's the case about overvaluation, and the town's assessing team has gone through that in great detail. This is their response to that. Second part of their case is this unjust discrimination case, which is, it seems to be exactly what you heard before in a prior appeal and decided. It doesn't mean you can't decide that differently if you choose to, but he wrote a pretty clear-cut decision about what is apparently the same issue. Then the third is an issue which is beyond your peer review, which is whether this property is entitled to a tax exemption as a result of being a charitable or a nonprofit, charitable and benevolent organization. That's not decided at this board level, it's decided in the court, and that's what they're talking about in the final paragraph. So there's three sort of moving parts. Two of them are germane to you. I'd like to see have a discussion, particularly on the overvaluation question, and if you could give me some feedback on what you felt was compelling, and then if you would like me to, I could, as I have in the past, write up a draft decision. It wouldn't be a final decision tonight. It would be you would give me the feedback, and then you would see the draft decision and then make your vote at the next time. You can also give me feedback if you feel there's anything different about the discrimination case. Otherwise, I would plan to import basically the decision from the prior case and kind of merge that into the longer decision in this case.
That's fair. Does anybody have any questions? I know I do, but I will defer and go last.
I do.
Okay, you want to start?
It was on? Yes, it was on. I don't have any questions on the discrimination. I think we should just go with where we are. The insurance, normally insurance is based on replacement value, and so the 101 million I don't really think is really reflective in this discussion. However, I do want to talk about depreciation. The base lot part I also totally agree with. I do want to talk about depreciation. I'm not an assessor, so I'll just ask this question more straightforward. If it was put into use on 2002 and is in well-maintained building, why wouldn't you use 2002 as the effective date with a higher than average, like either a good or a very good valuation to come up with the depreciation? It just seems more straightforward than changing the dates either back to 1994 or forward to 2006 and then going back to average. What you've stated is it's not average, that it's well maintained, but it was put into service in 2002. So I don't quite get why you wouldn't just use that actual date with a better, maintenance.
So to speak to that, there are multiple ways in which you can get at a depreciation, and I see where you're coming from. Our system, the CAMA system Vision, automatically creates an effective year built versus based on the Marshall and Swift calculations, given the quality and maintenance of the building, so the condition. And our CAMA system with a good plus 20 grade and average condition comes up with 2006 for an effective year built, meaning it's not as old as it could be because it's been well maintained. It may be counterintuitive, but that's how the system derives that 2006. As for how the previous number of the 1994, I agree that that is problematic and not an accurate method, so I'm glad that we were able to discover that and make it a more correct statement of value.
With 2002 with a higher maintenance, better value, better maintenance list.
Condition. Yeah.
A condition, there you go, there's a word. With an older year built with a better condition, almost offset the newer date with an average condition? I mean, it just...
It's possible to take it into consideration, so we could have, as an assessing department, put in a good condition instead of average, and that would have changed the depreciation probably by about 2%, let's say. So instead of 13% depreciation, it would have been 11%. And we chose not to do that because when it's the high grade, good plus 20, it's already depreciating at a lower rate because the high craftsmanship makes it depreciate slower than if it had been low grade building quality, which would
So
have depreciated quicker.
what is the total useful life of a building like this, a 40-year or?
I don't have it in front of me, but it
Oh.
varies depending on the quality of construction. The Marshall and Swift book lists buildings like this as classes and then grades within classes. So class A, B, C, D, and then excellent, good, average, below average. And
Okay.
the appropriate methodology for this is it's a good depreciation level, so it depreciates slow. It's not indicative of good on this tax card, that's a different qualifier, but the tables reflect that behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's the only question I had, not quite understanding that depreciation year and condition. I had no questions other than that about everything you went through. I thought it was excellent.
Can I just add to that before we go to you? Because I think it'll come up. Is there anything in Marshall and Swift that helps you determine which one of those you're gonna click on? Like, is there a chart that says, this is A, this is B, and this is Y? Because, you know, like with a regular house, it's
Yeah.
2x4 construction or 2x6
It's
construction.
subject to
or
the
something.
features and building methods.
Right,
and-
there's
and
something
construction.
in there that makes that very clear for you.
That's correct.
Okay.
And those numbers are also built into our system behind the scenes. But yes, if you look at the Marshall and Swift manuals and you look under the, you know, assisted living tab, let's say, it's, you know, there's different tabs and categories. You know, an A and good might have a little paragraph explaining qualities you might see.
Right.
Here's the type of framing. Here's the level of prestige associated with it. And adornments and whatever, and they give examples of things you might see, and then you go down to average, and they'll say the prestige and adornments are not here, and it's, you know, to code but not above it, and good will be above code in trying to make a, you know, a statement. They use more normative terms than that, but
Yeah, no, fair enough, that makes sense.
yeah.
I've used Marshall and Swift before on personal stuff, but
Yeah.
never on commercial, and so I assumed, but I thought that would be appropriate question. Okay, we can go ahead if you have some.
So, one of the things that catches my attention, and I think you've actually gone to the appellant's favor, really, in a lot of ways. When I look at, you mentioned the insurance values. So one thing about insurance values is that I'm kind of looking at is we've assessed a total of value for the whole property at what, 81,371, was that right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's including land
Yes.
and buildings,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
By cost analysis.
Yes.
An insurance insurance value is not going to factor in land.
Mhm.
It's only calculating in the buildings.
Right.
And the insurance value that we've got here, even though it says that it's at a 2% increase for inflation, is at 101, 123, 820.
Mhm.
So we're already 20,000 over,
Yeah, 20 million.
right? Or 20 million over.
Yeah, 20 million.
And we're really, we're almost 50 million over versus what the building value is that you are assessing at,
That's correct.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then even if we take into account an adjustment for the 2% inflation that they're adding, we're still only seeing a building value of 991, 410, 820, whatever it is, ish. So we're still a good 40 million under what the insurance value really would be.
That's true, and the only thing I'll add, like was earlier noted, that they're insuring for the replacement cost, and when we
Right.
assess something, it's replacement cost new, less depreciation.
Less depreciation, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, even, when I'm comparing a 991, 410 to 54, 541, 5, that's not 13% difference, right? In terms of depreciation. So, my feeling is, and I'm not saying that there's anything vastly problematic with this, but I would say that I'm kind of wondering why they even bothered to include the insurance stuff in there, because it doesn't help their case. you know, when I look at that, I say, you know.
Didn't you ask for it, though? I thought the
Yes.
town asked
Yeah,
for it.
okay. Because when I look at that, I kind of, you know, and it does, you know, it does separate out personal property, which I'm sure with, you know, with an institution like this, you've got significant trade fixtures and personal property involved. So, but still. So I guess my only comment would be that I feel like your assessment is still very much in favor of the appellant and not unbalanced towards them. More unbalanced towards the town in some ways, or maybe more, you've been very accommodating, let's say, is my opinion.
And our hope was to put across the point as well, when there's a judgment call, we went with the conservative side that favor the taxpayer.
And I appreciate that. I think that's always a good policy.
That it? All right.
That's
All
all I
right, I'm
have.
out. See, I like to go last because you guys won't ask the same questions. I got nailed on this one. When he reassessed, and in essence, he really did reassess, that was a full-blown reassessment. Did he use the same methodology that KRT did? I mean, was he doing it basically the same way, but just looking at different things, or did he just blow it up?
So it was the same methodology in general terms, but like I had noted, some of the methods on specific parts of the valuation were different, like the base lot calculation is notable. Instead of using the guideline ratio 3-to-1 building to land, he determined a different method was more appropriate, and that ended up in the taxpayer's favor by a smaller base lot. And then furthermore, the same methods were utilized, but a very in-depth review of everything, maybe more thorough the second time around to make sure there was nothing missed, picked up a couple additional errors, some going up, some going down.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it almost seems like, nothing against KRT, but they had a lot to do in a short amount of time, so they're blowing through things.
Right.
He really definitely seemed to take his time, do a nice job, running lasers, whatnot.
Yeah.
Did it right. So that answers that question also. Actually, so is it normal in something this large to use more than one approach? So you have the cost approach, you have the different. That's normal, correct? To use
Correct.
several different
It's,
approaches to back yourself up almost?
Yes, it's a common practice to take into consideration all three approaches to value in all instances. That said, you know, for residential properties, cost and sales are way more usable. Income won't be unless it's an apartment building or whatnot. But all three values are considered, and then the most appropriate one is led with, and the other two validate when possible.
Perfect, makes sense.
And you once again, you gave the most weight to the cost approach.
That's correct.
Which makes the most sense for this commercial type building. One last thing I did want to go on
Sure,
the
go
record
ahead.
of is that I do agree with our prior decision that we don't see that there was any discrepancy or any discrimination with, you know, the timing of the assessments and when they were placed into effect. I think that that's our original decision still holds true in this case as well.
Okay, regarding depreciation, my first thought as you were talking about it was, you know, what if you went in and overrode the vision system and, you know, changed something on your own to give them, like, well, you know, we're on the borderline or something. Not saying that was your the thought process, but let's say that thought process comes up. Would that, in essence, put you in? I mean, maybe this is a little rhetorical, but if you started doing that, if an assessor did that once, now you really have created discrimination. If you're like, well, I'm going to give them right, I'm just going to override vision, right? You guys go by what's in vision, that's your tool, and you go down it and you go piece by piece, and you hold to that, correct?
Almost exclusively, yes, but there are instances when it's appropriate to override certain fields, but we only do that if there's enough evidence to justify it and we document that, and in this case, there was no reason to override anything.
Okay, fair enough.
Agreed.
would it have been a large difference if this was, and I'm probably gonna say this wrong, the quality was good and not great? Was it great you put it at, what was it?
No,
Sure.
Average.
Average versus, would you put it at, above average? or good?
We have it at average.
You have
And
it
are you
at
asking,
average.
had we put it at good?
Is average good and very good?
There's excellent as well, so there's excellent, very good, good, average, fair, and poor.
And you ended up at good?
Average.
No, they
you
ended
ended
up at
at
average,
average?
which he
Average.
stated was probably about a 2% difference in the depreciation factor.
Each step of the way. In this instance, given its age, probably would have been about 2%, I'm not certain.
Okay, fair enough. You gave him a break on additions, $7 million.
Average equals 2% less than good?
What's that?
He's
Approximately an
estimating.
Yeah,
estimate.
yeah.
In this instance, I believe so,
Yeah.
but I'd have to review the camera system.
Fair
It's
enough.
different for every parcel depending on the type of building and when it was built and
That's
the
what you would
grade.
estimate here?
That's what I would estimate.
Okay.
Meaning your depreciation rate would drop to about 11%?
Correct.
I think this was already answered. But man, it's a paragraph, so I'm gonna read it anyways. How did base lot change in revised assessment affect the final assessment? This actually was in the taxpayers, was this actually in the taxpayer's interest or just more accurate than the original?
So the base lot change was both more accurate and appropriate for this style of building, but it was also favored the taxpayer. So if you see in the original Exhibit 9 on the first card, the very bottom of the card is the land portion. The base lot was 35.67. And with the new GIS overlay with Google Earth, which was Exhibit 12, I believe, the base lot was reduced to 31 acres.
And to be clear, the reason why that's favorable is the base lot is rated at a higher tax rate.
Much
And so-
higher.
And so having a smaller base lot is, reduces taxes.
Correct, and just to give the specifics on how that change affected the assessed value, the original land value with the higher size base lot was $30,552,700. And then it went down to $26,829,500, so that's a change down of assessed value of $3.7 million.
All right, and last couple little things here. Reading through the letter they sent along, my note on the side here is, for the second paragraph, for the second issue, the discrimination is, see last decision.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It doesn't seem to be any difference between the argument.
No, it seems to be
in that case,
quite
in
identical.
this case.
That's correct. Checks it back. And everything else is. No, I think I'm good. That is.
Okay, so, I'm not trying to cut anybody off or rush things along in any way, but I think I've gotten good notes of your comments and good notes of the presentation, and certainly read carefully the taxpayer's presentation, and I think I have enough information, if you would allow me to come up with a draft decision for consideration. As I've said always in the past, and I'll keep repeating, I'm not the decision maker. I'm just here as a writer to help facilitate the process. It's totally up to you. And you, as in the past, have not been bashful to make changes and disagree, and that's what the process is all about. We're trying to run a fair process here. So I guess what we need from you, Tracy, is time to come back.
I had fun. I look at my calendar.
Oh, yeah.
Tuesday, the 14th is available. 6
Next
PM.
week? That's next Tuesday, correct?
say the 14th at 6? Works for me.
I should be good for that.
Sure.
And we can't go
Yes.
earlier, correct?
I can do the 14th.
We probably could go earlier if everyone's in agreement.
It'd be
You
okay.
guys
Out of here
pick
earlier.
a time.
I'm available anytime.
Can you do 5 instead?
5
You want to do 5 instead?
works for me.
Sure.
Does that
I
work?
mean, I'd rather, I'd just come over from work.
You
Sure.
don't have to
5
be
o'clock
here.
would be
You're
okay?
welcome to be here.
5
yeah,
o'clock is okay?
These for non-testimonial.
Right, but
No, it's just for, yeah, deliberations.
I mean,
So,
usually they show
so
up.
it's going to be at 5 instead of 6?
If that's okay with both of you,
Fine by
works
me.
for us, if it's okay for you.
So
Yeah.
Tuesday, the 14th.
It'll be
at 5
quick, we'll be
p.m.
home for dinner instead of coming back.
Well, no,
That's
my
thought.
mom eats
Occasionally
at
there
5,
is
but
a
my
question,
husband can
though.
feed her.
There could be like, occasionally we do ask a question, say.
It does come up, sometimes we will,
Not, right, we're not asking anybody to re-argue anything, but if we just want to confirm a number or something like that, sometimes.
Sure, yeah.
You can ask a question.
And just to be clear, I may be otherwise occupied that night, but Nick will be here, and we'll have somebody else in attendance in case there are questions.
okay, cool, that works.
Thank you.
Okay, so 5 o'clock on the 14th.
5 o'clock on the 14th it is.
Okay.
So do we need any motion or anything?
We
like
do
that?
need a motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn.
and we need a second.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? 3-0. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate your time.